In high school, there was a guy in our class who seemed very interesting to me. He never spoke much. He never interacted with too many people. He usually minded his own business, and that's how it was most of the time. He'd only talk when he needed to say something. He didn't strike me as antisocial or a weirdo. He just kept to himself most of the time. For the most part, we actually liked him because that was how he was. So being a friend to all that I was in high school, I once decided to sit with him at lunch. I struck up a conversation with him. He greeted me well, and to my surprise, he managed to indulge me in an engaging conversation. We spoke about a few different things regarding the school and whatnot. After a while, I decided to ask why he didn't interact much with anyone in school. To which he replied he had friends outside the school, and to my surprise he invited me to hang out in the evening. I almost became giddy with excitement. I know that sounds strange, but I was going to become the first guy to hang with Mike after school. That was going to be some story in class. Later that evening we decided to meet up near an abandoned house at the end of a lightly populated street. I know the location seems highly sketchy, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Mike texted me that he would bring his other friends. I just figured this is a hangout spot for them. Of course, I wasn't going to be the odd man out saying we shouldn't hang out near an abandoned house. As I arrived at the location, I was surprised to see a crowd. There were more people than I expected here. Mike did mention that he had friends outside the school, but I didn't expect there to be this many, and that's not even the weirdest part. Some of his so-called friends were adult men and women. Some were old enough to be our grandparents. I was nervous because I didn't know what to make of it. I took Mike away from his group a little bit and asked him what was going on and who are all these people. Mike just chuckled and reassured me that it's all good, we're all friendly people who care for each other like a family. I started to panic a little bit because I noticed these people giving me looks and quickly looking away to make it look unnoticeable. Some people kept staring even when I looked at them. I was becoming increasingly more uncomfortable, and I decided I'd say my goodbyes and leave whatever this gathering was. I went over to Mike, who was talking to an older man who was bald with a long white beard. Just as I walked over, the man stepped closer to me and put his arm over my shoulder and said, "My brothers and sisters, let us all head into the house." I wanted to tell them I wanted to leave, and yet I felt like I was getting dragged into the house by my wrists. I looked around for an opening and luckily found some space to maneuver around these people. I let my wrist go loose. I asked Mike what was going on, to which he replied, "I'm sorry." I immediately used all my force to break loose and run away from the crowd. They chased me down the street but eventually gave up when they saw a family around the blocks coming out. I got home and told my parents. They knew something was wrong by looking at my face. They immediately called the police. After about 7 to 8 minutes, the police arrived at the location to investigate the scene. They found an empty street ending with nobody in sight. They looked into the abandoned house. And in the basement, they found blood that came from different sources. I don't know what happened that day. I don't know what they planned on doing to me. Who those people were. I never saw Mike at school after that. I'm old enough to figure it was probably a cult that either tried to recruit me or sacrifice me that night. Maybe that is too far-fetched, but that is the only logical explanation I've been able to come up with.
I was traveling to Oklahoma for my cousin's wedding. I decided to drive there as it wasn't a long drive and I didn't want to overspend on a plane ticket. The wedding was on a Sunday and I left my house on a Friday. I planned on getting there one day before the wedding, so that I would be well rested. I left around the evening and decided to drive throughout the night and reach by Saturday morning. I finished my long shift from work and decided to hit the road. I covered a lot of distance through the early hours of my ride, and I only stopped once for coffee and got back on the road. The exhaustion was starting to take over by this point, but I kept going. There were empty stretches of land on both sides of the road, and nothing was visible that far ahead. I kept driving on the dark, empty road, and after an hour and a half, my exhaustion almost made me pass out. My car swerved off the road and I almost lost control of my car. That's when I decided to make one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I was already at the side of the road. So I put an alarm for 1 hour on my phone and decided to sleep for an hour. I understand the risk involved in taking a nap in pitch darkness at the side of the road, but I figured being on the road would be just as dangerous. I thought this power nap would revitalize my senses. I figured it was only an hour-long nap, and realistically, what's the worst that's going to happen in an hour? I was not ready for the answer to that question. I dozed off pretty quickly. I went into a deep sleep immediately. After a while, I woke up to the sound of a loud thud. I was still pretty sleepy and slow to open my eyes until I gained some consciousness and remembered where I was. I immediately jumped up and started looking around. I couldn't see anything, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a dark figure in front of my car. It scared me and I immediately started my car. As my headlights lit up the front, this man rushed over to the side of my window and started hitting it, trying to break it. I floored my car back into the road and sped off. That's when my rear window shattered as the sound of gunfire echoed across the empty landscape. I couldn't believe this guy was shooting at me. I swerved my car from left to right for a little bit so that this guy couldn't get a clear shot, and then I heard 2 more gunshots until I put some distance between us. I was speeding away on the road, still shaken up from what had just happened. Trying to calm down, I jumped out of fear when my alarm went off. I turned it off and kept driving at speed until I reached my destination. The exhaustion had all disappeared from my body and I was more awake than I've ever been. I don't know what that man was planning. Why was he shooting at me, or why he didn't shoot me when I was sleeping in my car? These are questions that bother me every now and then, but I'm glad I don't know the answers to them.
If you enjoy our content, help our team grow as we head on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Show your support by dropping a like and subscribing to our channel for future videos. If not, that's okay too. Just remember, sometimes the scariest thing in the world can be another human. Stay safe and stay vigilant.